This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Heyo, welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. Holy smokes, do we have an episode for you today. My name is Eric PLL, the host of the Benefits Buzz, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Kelsey Burgad. Kelsey, it's been a whirlwind of a week, hasn't it?
A week? How about a year?
Fine.
We get a new bill every week.
We absolutely do. And this week we're talking about the American Rescue Plan Act. And if we're being in full transparency, our producer is probably like strangling us. But when this thing got passed, right, I think Biden signed it on the 11th. We're like, we have to blow up our entire podcast schedule and do an episode just on this. So here we are doing an episode of this because I think there's a lot of, if you're like me, and I want to be super humble, I am still confused about what the bill means. And so we wanted to bring on the two smartest people we knew in our ecosystem that could talk about this. So I want to introduce Kelly Hockett, who's the Director of Product Strategy of Health Segment here at WEX. And of course, a familiar name and face, Chris Bird, our Executive Vice President for Healthcare Operations of the Health Segment of WEX. Both of you, welcome.
Howdy, strangers.
I think both of you have been on the podcast at least a few times now, so this is like not new, but you know, like Eric said, I think we're all still digesting and learning all the aspects of this bill. So Eric and I are 100% here to learn from both of you.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I think the last time you were on the show, Kelly, we were talking about like a huge bill that had just passed as well when COVID-19 had hit and the world was scrambling. So I think you're kind of our relief package go-to for this podcast. So thank you so much. And I know you both are super informed on what's going on. So we'll break it down because again, Kelsey and I, we're super humble. Like I'm personally a little bit confused on what's happening. So I think there might be a lot of HR professionals listening kind of going, okay, I knew something passed. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my employees? So let's just start with maybe the first half. And that's really talking about, we know a big part of this was around COBRA. There was some talk about dependent care, FSAs, but let's talk about COBRA first, right? Maybe just start by giving us that 30,000 foot overview, Kelly, on the COBRA subsidies within this law.
Yeah, happy to do so. The American Rescue Plan Act that was signed into law last week really allows for anyone that experienced an involuntary termination that is still within their maximum COBRA period to be assistance eligible if there's no other healthcare coverage and Medicare is not available to them. So that's just an important aspect of this bill that, it's really anyone that, has had an involuntary termination, had a reduction in hours, due to the pandemic, would be available for this subsidy. And so the stimulus package really included a premium assistance for healthcare coverage effective April 1 of 2021 and goes through September 30th of 2021. So we're looking at a 6-month period in which premiums will be subsidized at 100%. So really helping Americans that have been impacted by the pandemic and need access to health coverage, they'll be able to get that now through this premium assistance. The bill that was signed last week by President Biden does have similarities, if anyone can remember, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which was another stimulus package that subsidized COBRA due to the economic financial crisis. And so, plan administrators and sponsors like WEX that provided premium assistance under ARA should be really dusting off their subsidy operations and technical updates to help employers comply with this new law effective April 1.
That's a great overview. It's a positive thing, I think, for a lot of people who are listening, knowing that we've maybe been through something similar to this before. So hopefully we have, a plan ready for what we're going to do here now that this new bill was passed. But let's dig in just like a little bit deeper on how this pertains to COBRA. So what are some of the key points within this bill?
Yeah, great question, Kelsey. I think the key point that it's 100% subsidy from April to September. And so that's huge. It's really kind of free COBRA, if you will, that for any premiums or health premiums. The subsidy is prospective for individuals, but retrospectively, so generally as far back as 18 months, those individuals could receive premium assistance. So in other words, those individuals may receive the subsidy on a prospective basis without having to elect and pay COBRA retrospectively for months prior to the 100% premium assistance under the American Rescue Plan Act. So that's kind of a big difference when it comes to COBRA administration, in that you don't have to go back and elect based off of your original effective date of COBRA, but you can elect prospectively as of April 1st.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, as I'm processing all this, I like to try and figure things out in ways of like examples or tangible examples. So follow with me here, Kelly. So let's just throw up a scenario here, right? Let's say like you had a worker, right, or an employee that was laid off in last June, right? And they did not enroll in COBRA. What does that mean for him or her? What are they looking at?
Yeah, great question. I like breaking it down too. Assuming in that example, the worker doesn't have access to any group health plans or Medicare eligible, the worker would be deemed an assistance eligible individual, and they may elect COBRA coverage with premium assistance at that 100% level effective April 1 of 2021. So that's kind of the simplest way to look at it, is that worker, would be eligible for the subsidy.
So I'm thinking about this from an HR person's perspective, and what does the rollout of this look like for them and their organization?
Yeah, as we, look to analyze the bill and the law that was put in place last week, employers should really start to think about, which of their, who is eligible for that subsidy, and really looking at who had a qualifying event of an involuntary termination, who had a reduction in hours, to start to identify who would be eligible for the subsidy. And that's an important piece and an analysis that employers should be thinking about right now, so that the subsidy is offered to the correct individuals, and that assistance is available for them on April 1st. The other thing that, we're really watching closely is the DOL will provide model notices within the next 30 days. And so, really thinking about what are the, notifications that will be required, and making sure that we're, bringing in those model notices and using that appropriate language. From there, that after those model notices are provided, we're looking at providing those notices, by May 30th would be kind of a deadline that employers should be thinking about. That would be 60 days from that effective date, is when these notices need to be in the hands of anyone deemed eligible. And the last thing, really just, to kind of remind employers, and that there are still no changes. We saw the Disaster Relief Act, that announcement was made the end of February on how we need to still be considering extended timeframes for payment and elections, and none of that changed. And so we still need to be, providing, those individual periods to make payments and to make elections. Those are still in place. And so important thing, those two regulatory changes, we need to think about how we handle those administratively together.
COBRA was already so complex, and it just feels like it's getting more and more complex.
I know. I was just going to say that. I said, thank you, Kelly, for taking something as super complex and kind of just outline as simplistic as possible. So I know our listeners will appreciate that. I very much appreciate it.
You are welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe we'll shift a little bit. Chris, we'll get you in the game here too. I couldn't help but, I read all of our blog content, but I saw your blog specifically, when this law was signed. Listeners, if you haven't read it, you should check out our WEX blog. That was a cool little subtle promo. But you mentioned, right, this has been a priority, for WEX public policy, and I definitely feel that, right? But let's just be the devil's advocate. Why should this be something our listener, should get excited about? Like, what does this mean for the everyday listener, right?
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on who you are, but for anybody, I don't care, whether you're an employer or a broker, consultant, administrator, certainly if you're an individual thinking about this, if you were impacted, this is going to be huge help mean, Kelly said it well. This is essentially free COBRA for 6 months. So it really is going to enable these workers. And we know how many millions of people lost their jobs in the pandemic and are continuing to be unemployed. They're going to be able to continue their health coverage and importantly, their employer health coverage during this severe recession. And that's really important to them because they can keep their doctor, they can keep all their relationships in place. You know, if they're on a maintenance medication, it's not going to be a question of whether it's on their drug formulary or not. So it's really going to be good for them. And I will tell you that unlike previous recessions, this is a public health recession, right? It was induced by a public health crisis. And so having the healthcare is more important than ever. So I think it's something to get really excited about because it's taking a very challenging situation for millions of individuals, and it's really trying to help. And I want to put this in a little bit of context. There have been a lot of people who've tried to estimate how many people have lost their health insurance coverage. You know, WEX, we're only a piece of the market out there, but our preliminary count is that there are going to be something like 5 million people who are going to receive a notice just out of our platform sometime in the next 60 days. And some of those people will have been voluntarily terminated. So their notice is going to be, hey, you're not eligible for the subsidy, but you can appeal that if you think that's wrong. But a big portion of that number are going to be people who were involuntarily terminated, who did lose their jobs because of the recession. And that's just us. And so we're talking about millions and millions of people who are going to be helped here. I think the second thing from a public policy perspective is that there's been a lot of question about where is healthcare policy going. And in particular, does the progressive wing of the Democratic Party want to move the responsibility for covering people who are working age from employers, where it's been for decades and decades, to the federal government? You know, we've heard about Medicare for all, we've heard about public options. This is a tangible sign that the lawmakers in Washington actually do recognize the value of employer-provided health insurance coverage to workers and their families. And so I think that validation is really important to those who have a stake in that.
Yeah, good, solid breakdown as always. I think that's what I think that's kind of the theme of this episode, is just breaking down what this all means. So I appreciate the translation.
And the fact that there's 5 million people, and I understand that you said that some of those are, you know, voluntary, but maybe a small percentage. So it really puts into perspective that, you know, like you said, WEX is just a segment of that, and we're sending out 5 million notices. I mean, that's a ton of individuals who have been impacted. Yeah.
Absolutely. Super wild. Like, so it's hard to believe that someone listening to this wouldn't know someone or potentially be impacted. So again, this is why we're doing this episode. I love it. What about, Chris, to go back to this, what about the Affordable Care Act subsidies within this, with this law? How does that all factored in?
Sure, Eric. So in addition to the COBRA subsidy, the law also provides very generous, essentially 100% subsidies under the Affordable Care Act for people who have lost their jobs due to the pandemic. And so if you boil it down, you would say that an individual who is COBRA subsidy eligible will have a choice between fully subsidized employer COBRA or an individual insurance plan that they buy on an ACA exchange. And for every individual and her or his family, that's going to be a decision that they're going to have to work through. In general, however, if you think about the typical comparison between employer plans and ACA plans, typically Affordable Care Act plans have much, much higher deductibles than employer plans do, on average over 3 times as high. The out-of-pocket maximums are similarly disproportionately higher in the ACA. They're over twice as high in the typical ACA plan when compared to the typical employer plan. And the majority of Affordable Care Act individual insurance plans have restrictive networks. There was a study that was done just a couple of years ago in 2019 that found that 72% of all of the plans that are sold on the Affordable Care Act exchanges have some sort of restriction in the provider network. And so there's that risk that maybe your primary care physician, your OBGYN, your kid's pediatrician isn't in network. So if you put all those together, it kind of looks like Advantage COBRA, although obviously it will be an individual choice on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I mean, even more incentive for everyone to do their homework and understand what, plan they're enrolled in or they want to be enrolled in. So, I want to
Exactly.
take a step back for 1 second because we've been talking a lot about COBRA, and there was something in the blog post that sparked, an aha moment for me. And I think that's because I've worked at WEX for a number of years now, and I've been enrolled myself in a dependent care FSA. And, we see those contribution limits for medical FSAs, limited FSAs, HSAs slowly climb year after year. But I have not seen a ton on dependent care until I saw this bill, and I got super excited about it. So Chris, tell us how this bill has impacted dependent care FSAs.
It's hugely beneficial. Unfortunately, it's only temporary. It only applies to calendar year 2021, but what it does is it raises the amount that you can contribute to a dependent care assistance program, commonly known as a dependent care FSA, from $5,000 to $10,500. And what does that mean? Quite simply, because there's a tax advantage associated with those contributions, it just lowers the cost of dependent care for those working families or those working parents, oftentimes mothers, who need to have access to that child care. And we know that in many, if not most markets, the annual cost of child care is in excess of $5,000. So this is real. This is really going to help people. You mentioned, Kelsey, that it's never been indexed, right? Believe it or not, the $5,000 maximum was established in 1986.
Can you imagine what people were paying for daycare back then?
Yeah, right.
I mean, come on.
Exactly.
$5,000 was great in '86.
Here's if you read my blog post, and I know at least 2 people did, and I thank you for that. If you just go into an inflation calculator that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has on their website, and you put in $5,000 1986, what does that mean in 2021? It's almost $12,000. Right? So we're not even quite keeping up with inflation by going to 10.5. But I did mention that this is only a temporary 2021 change. And so one of the things that the industry, and will be part of this, because we think it just makes sense, we'll be going back to Congress. In fact, we're going back this week because we're members of ECFC, the Employers Council for Flexible Compensation, and we're going to have a virtual fly-in this week. And one of our priorities is to say, thank you for doing this. Let's make it permanent. And let's index it for inflation in the future so that we're not here 10 years, 20 years down the road saying, look how little this is, right? Let's solve that problem once and for all.
I want to walk in there with you.
Yeah.
So bad.
I was doing a standing ovation in my office here while you were saying that. Just as an individual that has used dependent care FSAs for a number of years with 2 kids, and it's crazy to think that. So I know there will be tons of people listening that will be absolutely elated to hear that, even if it's only for a year, and we hope that you have success with that, Chris. No pressure on behalf of every parent in America. But that's great to hear, and important, again, as HR professionals, make sure you communicate that to your employees. There's going to be tons of families and parents that are desperate for that extra incentive. So thank you for that. And I think maybe lastly, let's talk about I think, there's a reason why WEX does, this podcast, and we have blogs, because we obviously are extremely integrated in this industry. We have tons of interest in this. And so maybe I would love for you to, and I think in part of that, we have a really interesting perspective that I think maybe the layperson might not be able to adjust. And so I want to be able to tap into that, as an insider who's maybe you talking on the Hill and hearing some of these things. What kind of engagement, maybe back on the COBRA side, what can we see, walk us through what that looks like from your perspective?
Well, I'll just tell you a little bit of history. I like to tell people that it's amazing how hard it is to get things done in Washington, D.C. And part of that's by design. I mean, the Constitution makes it hard to get things done. And we're in that week or those weeks where we're starting to think about anniversaries, right? When offices started to close down, when restrictions came in place, where a lot of people had to go home, where a lot of people started to lose their jobs, right? That was just about a year ago. And it was exactly then that we and others, but we really did play a leading role. So I'll take a little bit of credit here. We were out in front in talking to Congress about we need a COBRA subsidy. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to lose their insurance, and they need help, right? And so you mentioned at the top of the call that this is the biggest priority that we've had, and it goes back all the way back to last March. It was a long, winding path. I mean, I could regale you with stories. I won't bother you. This took a lot of twists and turns, and we were deeply engaged all the way along. And it looked for a while like we weren't going to succeed. Things really started to change when the Senate took control in the Georgia elections back in January. And once that control passed to the Democrats, we felt that there was a bit more sympathy on the Democrat side of the aisle. And we kind of pressed that, and we were able to get it into the bill and able to keep it into the bill. So on behalf of all of the people who are going to be helped, first and foremost by this, but also on behalf of all who worked to get this done, we want to express our appreciation to President Biden for putting it into his proposal right after he was inaugurated to Congress. This is really, really good policy, and it's going to help a lot of people. So that's the policy side of it. But I want to go back and finish where we started, which is really the important things that Kelly talked about, from a technology platform and from an operating perspective. What's our engagement look like here? And Kelsey, I think you said it well. You said the COBRA is very complicated. It's kind of complicated enough as it is, and it got more complicated last year with a lot of the rulings that came out. This just adds another layer of complexity on top of that, and it's like, that's all I need right now. I'm sure a lot of our audience is thinking, I didn't ask for this. I don't need this. So this is going to be difficult, and it's all in a compressed time frame. And so whether you're an employer, whether you're a broker or a consultant who's advising employers, whether you're an administrator, I just want to say we understand that the government has given consumers a huge benefit, but it is incumbent upon the entire ecosystem to react very, very quickly in a compressed time frame. And so we understand the operating challenges that all of you face. And we're going to work with you, and we're going to help you get through this. I mean, my part's the easy part. Kelly and the team that she leads, and a whole bunch of other people here at WEX, and our partners and employers and brokers, consultants, everybody has a role to play, and we're going to figure this out together. Just be patient. We will get through this. I kind of like to think of it like a barn raising. That's my virtual analogy here. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be hard work, and everybody's going to be tired at the end of the day, but we have to keep in mind how many people this is going to help.
That is such a great way to look at it, because, even just a couple minutes ago when you were talking about like a year ago today, it's almost like one of those moments in time where now looking back at it, you remember exactly where you were when you found out that pretty much the entire world was shutting down, right? And I think it's one of the first times that in this industry, and I could be wrong, I mean, I haven't been in this industry for that long, but it's one of the first times where we're all on the same page. I mean, everybody is trying to understand and figure out how to manage these changes at the exact same time. So, if you've been listening to Benefits Buzz with us for the last year, I think a year ago around this time was one of the first episodes that we did on, legislation or bills that impacted the world when it came to the pandemic. So, our continued goal on this podcast is going to be just to educate everybody on what we know that's happening in the industry, what's coming, which is why you see Chris on the podcast quite often. So we hope you guys learned something today, and we hope you stick with us, because we're going to keep bringing it to you as we know more.
Yeah, we should know. We're recording this on March 15th, and this will launch in a week. So who knows? Let's fingers crossed this isn't completely outdated in 7 days. Let's hope things yeah, just a tish. So Kelly, Chris, thank you so much. I know this was again as a bit of a scramble. We wanted to make sure and bring this to our listeners, and so I appreciate you diving in, breaking everything down for us. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime.
Absolutely. And hey, everyone, if you enjoyed this episode of just like the Temptations, I ain't too proud to beg. Well, we would love a great review. So if you love this episode or love the Benefits Buzz episode and podcast, go out to iTunes, Apple Music, and give us a rating. We would very much appreciate it. With that, thank you so much, and come back next week for another episode of Benefits Buzz. We're out. WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations. You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.